Going forward. So welcome to week 7 of the HTIM hospitality curriculum for Hillsdale. Let's get started in the ServSafe Food Manager. Obviously, most of today we'll be talking about how to handle food, how to handle yourself around it, hygiene, those types of things. So again, same processes. Last time, stop me if you have questions, that type of thing. But today we're going to start right out with a little bit of a quiz. So first question right out of the gate is, when is a foodborne illness considered an outbreak? So is it A, 2 or more people having the same symptoms after eating some food, of the same food, regulatory authorities have investigated, or C, the outbreak is confirmed by laboratory analysis? In the chat, give me what your best guess is, or maybe for those that have been part of this before. A lot of A's out there. Do I have anybody else? Well, believe it or not, it's all 3, but you're going to know more on A, right? You're going to know that immediately. The regulatory authorities have investigated because maybe something flew under the radar that you didn't know about, or the outbreak is confirmed by laboratory analysis. Again, something that you may not know about, but it's really all 3 in this situation. So it's considered an outbreak when A, B, and C, any one of those have happened. Again, you're going to be in the know for the 2 or more people having the same symptoms. So just keep that in mind. Probably on the exam in some form, so keep that in mind as well. Okay. So we know challenges for any food safety is about the time that the food is either sitting out or at certain temperatures. So just want to make sure that we understand that time is of the essence when we're doing this kind of stuff. Language and culture, especially with employees, making sure that we get the communication as really good on the same level, so that we know that when we're given instructions that it's received properly, that type of thing. Literacy and education, making sure that we're doing training, making sure that we're staying up on top of it going forward. These 2 pathogens, disease-causing microorganisms, we want to make sure that we understand what those are. Unapproved suppliers, everybody runs their show differently, but if we have unapproved suppliers, farm markets, that kind of stuff that are unapproved, that could certainly leave the door open for some issues. High-risk customers, certainly those that have illnesses and that type of thing, and staff turnover, which can lead to people that may not be as trained as we would like them to be. So again, keeping the staff educated on what constitutes food safety. Adam puts in the chat, hopefully you guys can see that the ServSafe book specifically lists A in their multiple choice. So if that's the case, I will do some checking on that to make sure. Any other thoughts on that, Adam?
No, I just know I teach that all the time, and that's their specific answer. Okay. It's probably what is the best example or what is the best choice.
Yeah, best choice. One of those
types of things. But but that's the one that they specifically list. So
got it. So make sure that we read the question. So if it's asking for the best answer, go with that. If we do have some issues with foodborne illnesses, the cost can be lost work. Obviously, employees not being able to come to work because of that situation. Certainly medical costs if we have to make a trip to the doctor or the hospital. Long-term disability if something is severe. In some cases has caused death, depending on the type of the person that gets the type of foodborne illness. And certainly the unsafe food really is usually the result of some type of a contamination, and that could be the presence of harmful substances in food, right? Contamination may come from certainly any biological, chemical, or physical hazards, any unsafe practices that we haven't either been trained about, or maybe we haven't been trained as well enough. So making sure that we keep everybody up to date. So we've just briefly touched on this, but certainly food becomes unsafe if we're purchasing it from unapproved source. Time and temperature abuse, which we'll talk about, cross-contamination using the same areas to prep food or cut food and that type of thing, not a good idea. Certainly personal hygiene, making sure that we're washing our hands and taking care of any cuts, abrasions, and things like that, as well as making sure that we are cleaning and sanitizing. So food becomes unsafe in those specific examples as well as others. Poor cleaning and sanitizing, right? Equipment and utensils that are not washed, rinse and sanitize between uses. Want to make sure that we're making our due diligence here, not just throwing them in water, rinsing them, and then moving on. And we'll go more into depth in that. Food contact surfaces are wiped clean instead of being washed, rinsed, and sanitized, right? A lot of times we get in a hurry, things are busy, and all of a sudden we are just wiping things down and brushing things off. So making sure that we're doing everything that we can as far as that goes. Wiping cloths that are not actually stored in sanitizer solutions between uses. Maybe we just left it out on a counter, or it's put somewhere. So again, just want to make sure that we are using that process every time. If you're using a sanitizer solution, maybe it's not at the required levels that it's in the instructions. We've kind of thrown it together, and it's not something that we need it to be. It has to be at the proper levels to do its job. Any questions, thoughts, comments here? Okay. So the populations that are at high risk of foodborne illness, these people seem to have a higher risk of getting foodborne illnesses, and that would be the elderly, preschool children, preschool age children, to keep in mind, and people with compromised immune systems. Oops. A lot of times we're not going to know that unless we know them pretty well, that they have some type of an immune system issue. But again, keep your eyes and ears open for something like that. Trying to keep some food safe, right? Controlling that time and temperature. We'll get more into depth on that. Preventing cross-contamination, which you saw briefly on there. We'll talk a little bit about prep areas. Certainly keeping yourself clean, right? Washing hands when you leave the area as well as when you come back, and not touching things like phones and that kind of stuff in the food prep area. Certainly right from the beginning, purchasing from approved reputable suppliers. That doesn't totally cut it out, but it certainly will cut down on incidences. And certainly proper cleaning and sanitizing. When we talk about TCS food, we are talking about this acronym. The acronym there, it's called Time and Temperature Control for Safety. So that's what TCS food is. And then we talk about also ready to eat food. So two areas that as we go forward, we'll talk about TCS food and ready to eat food. So the training and monitoring, right? We want to make sure that we are training our staff to follow the safety procedures that you guys have in place. And following up to make sure they are following those procedures properly. So we have to have that good initial training and then ongoing training, just in case we forget that it's always behooves us to make sure that our staff is up to date and reminded of the things that they need to do. Over time, shortcuts potentially could creep into your process, and so we just want to tighten things up from time to time. Certainly, we do this by providing all the staff with the general food safety knowledge and provide job-specific food safety training. So again, depending on the position that they have in your organization, what more do they need, and what more do they need to be monitored to make sure they're doing it correctly, and retraining them on a regular basis. Questions, comments here? Once we do that training, we want to make sure that we're documenting that training, because if there's an incident, some type of a food outbreak or illness that happens, people are going to ask questions, and we want to make sure that our staff has been trained, but we want to make sure that we're documenting that training. Certainly monitoring the staff, they're following the procedures, and if they're, because we know people are always watching, you as a supervisor and or manager, they're watching you as well. So making sure that you're doing it the way that you've trained it and taught it. For anybody that misses or does steps incorrectly, retraining needs to be involved to make sure that that's done. So certainly on staff should be a certified food protection manager, and to be on site, somebody in the organization needs to have that certification on site during your operating hours. Questions, comments, thoughts here? We talk about some agencies that are responsible for a lot of this monitoring and making sure that they're responsible, that if there's anything that happens at your operation, that they know about it, and they could potentially come in, do interviews and some investigation on it. But the FDA, they happen to inspect all food except these three areas: meat, poultry, and eggs. They regulate any of the food that's transported across state lines. And they provide the technical support and training. Got a great website that you can go to use. And they also issue the food code. And when we're talking about food code, these are the recommendations for food safety regulations, which we will talk about further on in this class. They're created for the different areas, which could include the city, county, state, and any tribal agencies. And certainly is a recommendation and not the law. If you're not doing something properly, it's against the food code, but certainly not going to be arrested for something like that unless it's on another level as far as intent. We get into the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA, and that is the department that does inspect the meat, the poultry, and the eggs. They certainly regulate that food transported across state lines, and then any involving more than one state they get involved with. And then two others are the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and then the Public Health Services. They assist that FDA and USDA and state and local health departments in anything that they need. And they also conduct the research into causes of foodborne illness outbreaks, and then assist in any investigation of those outbreaks. Questions, comments here? Some of the local, state, and local regulatory authorities can and do write and adopt codes for regulating the retail and food service operations. These may differ from the FDA food code, but not all the time. These responsibilities include inspecting some of the operations that you have, enforcing those regulations, and investigating any complaints and illnesses that might happen, and then issuing these licenses and permits. Up to this point, any questions, comments, thoughts? What do you got? Okay. I know it's right after lunch, so here we go with the forms of contamination. My apologies. So contaminants may come from a lot of different places, right? Animals used for food, certainly in the air, contaminated water and dirt, depending on the premises. Certainly chemicals used in the operation that potentially could get into something that inadvertently. And then certainly natural contaminants, right? Anything like bones in the fish and those types of things. People are a big issue here as far as contaminants that can get into our food, unfortunately. And this can both be deliberate or accidentally. Hopefully less deliberate and more accidentally, but again, either one is not a great thing. Certainly, if you go to the restroom, make sure you're washing your hands, right? The fecal oral route of contamination. We know that failure to wash hands after using the restroom can be an issue. And if we don't do that, feces on fingers can get onto the food. and food with feces is then eaten, and then, that's when trouble starts. Certainly if somebody's sick, that can also have a situation where it can be passed from person to person. Any sneezing or vomiting on the food or food contact surfaces can certainly contaminate that area, and then touching dirty surfaces or equipment and then touching the food can also come here. Sorry about it. Like I said, it's right after lunch, so not the best thing to be talking about. Biological contaminations. Here's things that can happen. The big 6 pathogens, right? This will be on the exam. So Shigella SPP, Salmonella typhi, non-typhoidal Salmonella. I'll just call this STEC. I think that's all you need. Hepatitis A and the norovirus. Okay, so again, those will be on the exam. Those are the big 6. Make sure that we know what those are. So conditions for bacteria to grow, there's a moisture content. It's called water activity. This is really the moisture available in food for bacteria growth. And I think we all can reasonably understand that the higher the moisture content, the more inviting that bacteria will love to live in that situation. So the AW, or the water activity scale, ranges from 0 to 1. The higher the value, closer to 1, the more available moisture. And on the high end, water has a water activity of 1. So again, knowing the foods that contain the higher moisture content will be a great place for bacteria to grow, and the drier the food, not so much. But again, it behooves you to have good practices all around. Some of the symptoms that are associated with a biological toxin could be vomiting, could be diarrhea. They could exhibit fever, nausea for sure, even some abdominal cramps, and jaundice. So something to make sure that you're aware of if you have employees that seem to have some of these symptoms. Not that you're going to know in every situation, but again, maybe this could be the start of something. You may have to send them home or send them to get some medical attention. Okay, any thoughts, questions, comments here?
I just was going to add, fecal oral certainly can be transferred from bathroom, not washing your hands, but there is also plenty that can be on produce from feces and stuff in field, from manure in fields, or from slaughtering animals and not properly, slaughtering them. You can have that from a lot of forms.
Excellent. Excellent point, Adam. You're exactly right. So we'll make sure that when we go through that piece of it, that we'll remind people of that as well. But it can come in all shapes and sizes, and again, that's why we're on the defense when we're trying to work all this stuff out to make sure that nothing gets through. So good point. Conditions for bacteria to grow. They have a great acronym called FAT-TOM. The conditions to grow. Can we walk down what those mean? Who has F? Food bacteria growth, right? Time and temperature control. Suzanne kind of puts out there, what percentage of cell phones have fecal matter on them? You know what, Suzanne? I don't even want to know, I guess. 100%. Adam puts in there. Great. Again, it's a high percentage, right? So again, make sure that we're washing hands. So food bacteria growth, right? Time and temperature control. The A is really about acidity. Bacteria grows best in the food that contains little or no acid. So again, we want to understand here that these foods that contain little or no acid, we may have an issue, right? So we have to make sure that we're very diligent in making sure that that's either washed or taken care of, so that doesn't happen. One of the T's here, the temperature range. Bacteria grows rapidly between 41 degrees Fahrenheit to 135. To understand that, and then time, right? The more time in temperature danger zone, the more it can grow. So the two T's are stacked up because extremely important there. The O, oxygen, right? Bacteria needs oxygen to grow, and then of course moisture. It grows well in the food with the high levels of moisture. So keep that in mind when we're looking at that. Questions, comments here? on the exam to make sure you know what those letters stand for.
Tom, I just want to add, so at Mets, we say 40 to 140, which is obviously a little bit more extreme than what the
Got it.
ServSafe says. So for people taking the test, if they haven't taken it yet, 41 to 135 is specific to ServSafe in most health departments. But we just make it a little even more extreme for Mets. And easy to remember, we say 40 to 140. So don't get confused if you are taking the test on that.
Perfect point. Yeah, 40 to 140 local, but the test will say 41 to 135. Thank you. Symptoms, right? Physical contaminants, right? We can have cuts from things that weren't that are sharp that we left unguarded, right? Dental damage for stuff that's in food, bones, and that type of thing. So it can cause that type of thing, even glass, and there can be choking hazards as well. And certainly, if we've eaten something that was glass or something like that we did not expect, obviously there can be bleeding and pain for some of the physical contaminants that get into our food, unbeknownst to us, right? And we served it, we just didn't know it, that type of thing. So what we can try to do, obviously, to prevent it, right? Purchase the food from approved, reputable suppliers. We'd love to say that's 1,000% safe, but that's not always. Sometimes in their process, something gets by their quality control. So again, trying to do the best we possibly can. That's why we want to inspect food upon receipt. But like you see in the example in the photo there, something inside a can that was noticed. But again, we try to do the best we can and look at all these types of things. And then the practice of good personal hygiene as well. Some of the groups that might be contaminating food, well, certainly terrorists or activists. Adam puts in, this could be bones that are in meat naturally, for sure, right? And stones and seeds and grain, that type of thing. Sometimes it just gets by the machines or the people that are in quality control, even the machines in quality control. Hopefully we don't have terrorists or activists that upset your food supply. So again, want to make sure that we're making every effort to serve and prepare good food. Unfortunately, disgruntled current or former staff can get into play here. I always use this story is that I golf once in a while on a golf course that has a community that's surrounding, and the third hole, we have to go through some of that community, and we looked down the road one time and all the lawns were brown. Well, an employee had switched Roundup into some of the sprayer, and when they left, they caused a lot of damage. So it can happen, hopefully not happen in your situation, but again, staff, current and former staff can get really mean on the way out. So vendors, hopefully we don't have a lot of the groups who may attempt to contaminate food. If they're vendors, they're not going to be your vendor for very long. God forbid competitors would do anything like this. Would be really dirty pool, but again, trying to make sure that everything is looked at, tested, washed, whatever we need to do. We have an acronym for the FDA's defense tool, and that is is assure to make sure the products received right when we get them in the door from safe sources, right? So we want to make sure that we're buying them from approved vendors. And again, that's not going to be 100%, but it's close to 100% as possible. We want to make sure the products that are received are safe. And we certainly have to monitor those products that we get in. But L for alert is monitor the security of products in the facility. That not everybody has access. Only the people that need access in the facility have the ability to get access. E, the employees know who's in your facility, and what they're doing, that type of thing. There's a certain amount of trust, but again, if there's people in your facility that are not employees, then we need to make sure that they're not in the areas of food prep and food preparation. Reports, right? Keep information related to food defense accessible so that we can get that information if there's a breakout of any type. So we want to make sure that we have that information readily available, not only for ourselves, but anybody that's conducting an investigation. Threats, right? Develop a plan for responding to suspicious activity or a threat to the operation. Do you have something in place that if you notice there's something going on, that you can quickly pivot and go to your plan B? Is that it? Yep, T. So, okay. Questions, comments here? So when we do get to a foodborne illness, responding to that, right, the first thing we want to do, if we've identified the product, is we want to make sure that we separate that product from the rest of the inventory, but we don't want to throw it away, right, because there's going to be a much more in-depth investigation that's going to go on, right? So we want to set the suspected product aside, if any remains, and then include that label, right? Do not use, but do not discard, just to make sure that people are understanding what's going on. And then documentation, very important that we document what's going on here as far as, log information about the suspected product, include the product description, the product date, the lot number, sell by date, pack size, all that type of stuff, because I'm sure if your vendor's on the hook for some of this stuff, they're going to want to know where it come from and what part of it, what lot was it, and those types of things. So we want to make sure that we're documenting all that good information. Staff's involved as well, right? Identify the staff, keep a list of the food handlers scheduled during the incident. We're probably going to have that already through our master schedule and our work schedule. So we're going to know who is there. If there's been any changes, we'll have to notate that as well. But again, we'll have that readily available. We want to make sure that we're talking and interviewing staff immediately on the outbreak, just to get their impressions of what they felt happened. The longer we wait, the less that is remembered. Certainly, if we have any of the outside of the company agencies come in, we want to make sure that we're cooperating, provide that appropriate documentation. Maybe we need to review the procedures that we have, right? Determine if the standards are still being met, the ones we initially trained on and on the ongoing, or if there was a shortcut that was made. And if something has slipped through the cracks, and maybe we need to make changes, right? So identify if standards are not working the way they were meant to work. Okay? Any thoughts, questions, comments here? Anything to add? Okay, continue on forward. We're going to switch gears here, go into food allergens, right? Food allergens is a protein in a food or ingredient. So for those of you that are allergic to different types of foods and or have food allergens, it's a big deal here, right? So when enough of an allergen is eaten, it can cause issues, some type of an allergic reaction, and those can be different types of reactions, right? So the biology of the process is the immune system mistakenly considers the food protein, which is normally harmless, to be a threat. The immune system attacks the food protein, and then we have issues, right? So to protect the guests, managers, and staff, we must know the signs of an allergic reaction, what to do when an allergic reaction occurs, and then the types of food that most often cause allergic reactions. You guys may have different processes or how you handle these types of things, but again, knowing what an allergic reaction looks like, most of the time your guests are probably going to react and tell you, but again, it's always good to keep on the lookout for that. So some of those could be, we know that allergic reactions don't happen, right away, but it can happen within a few minutes, but it can also happen up to 2 hours later, right? And it can also include some or all of these symptoms. So again, be on the lookout. Any type of difficulty breathing, wheezing, any itching or rashes on arms, neck, face, tingling, swelling, abdominal cramps, diarrhea, drop in blood pressure, which you're not going to probably know unless there's somebody that falls out, and the loss of consciousness, which you will know about, that type of thing. The most common food allergens, there's 9 of them that ServSafe lists. The big 9: milk, soy or soybeans, eggs, wheat, fish such as the tuna and cod, any crustacean shellfish such as crab, lobster, and shrimp, peanuts, of course, and then tree nuts such as almonds and nuts. And the newest one is sesame seeds, that type of thing. Questions, comments, thoughts here? Okay. So managing personal hygiene, right? We probably get tired of hearing this, probably tired of doing it, but again, it's essential for food contamination. We must make sure that we got the personal hygiene right, that we got the personal hygiene policies in place, and that we're following them. Training handlers of food on personal hygiene, the policies, and retraining them regularly so we don't start to shortcut because we get busy or the place is busy and we don't have time for personal hygiene. And people are watching, right? So you as a manager need to model that correct behavior at all times because people are going to watch you and hold you accountable for that. Certainly your food safety practices and making sure that we're supervising those that need to be following those practices. And revising anything that when policies, laws, or science changes, we need to revise those going forward. Again, just staying up on the latest information. When should we wash our hands? When we're certainly handling any animals or service animals or aquatic animals for sure. How about changing tasks, right? Before beginning a new task? I know the picture shows a nice phone. That's probably not the best. Want to wash our hands after handling our phone, leaving and returning to the kitchen prep area for sure. Using any type of electronic devices, computers, phones, tablets, anything like that. Even potential menus that you've handed to guests that, many of the menus now are in the electronic type. And then, eating when you're drinking, chewing gum, any tobacco, cigarettes, devices, anything like that. Want to make sure that we're washing our hands for that. Any thoughts? Anything to add here? When we got injuries, wounds, boils, that kind of stuff, how a wound is covered depends on where it's located. So again, cover wounds on the hand, finger, and wrist with an impermeable cover, whether it's a bandage or finger cot, and then use a single glove over the top of it, right? So again, we don't necessarily have to be dismissed, but we want to make sure we're taking great care in covering these wounds or issues. How about some wounds on the arm, right? Just a cover such as a Band-Aid, that type of thing. That's good. Make sure that it's secure. Other parts of the body with a dry, durable, tight-fitting bandage to make sure there's nothing that can get out and be spread to anything else that you might be preparing. With that, we use gloves, right? Single-use gloves should always be worn when handling ready-to-eat food, except when washing. And want to make sure that we're thoroughly washing ready-to-eat food, that type of thing, or except when handling ready-to-eat ingredients for a dish that will be cooked. Thoughts, questions, comments here? Signs of illness for staff illness, right? Any vomiting for sure, understanding there. Excessive trips to the bathroom, keep an eye out for that. Yellowing of any of the skin, eyes, or fingernails. Cold sweats or chills indicating a fever. And then persistent nasal discharge and sneezing. Again, all things that we should be watching for from your staff. Thoughts, questions here? Okay. Getting into the flow of food, kind of an introduction here. So for many of you, you may already know this cycle here, the flow of food, but there's a lot that goes into when you purchase food, right? So from the day you order it to the day you receive it, then storing it, all the way around from preparation, cooking, holding, reheating, service, and of course, everything that is involved in that, there's always an opportunity for some contamination, right? Making sure that we're keeping food safe. So we want to prevent, especially as we receive it, any cross-contamination. time temperature abuse here could, again, especially when we're storing the product. So a great way to do this to prevent cross-contamination is to prep raw and ready-to-eat food at different times, right? So separate the meat, poultry, seafood from unwashed and ready-to-eat fruits and vegetables. That way we can cut down a lot on any type of cross-contamination there. A way to avoid some of this too is by prepared foods, right? Buy food items that don't require such prepping or handling. But a lot of times that could be an increased cost as well. So you just want to make sure that if you don't do that, then you have policies in place for different places to prep, that type of thing. Adam talked about your time temperature control. So ServSafe looks at it this way, right? 41 degrees to 135. So food held in these range has been time temperature abused. We want to quickly go through the time range or the food range here to make sure that we either get it cooled down or higher than that to make sure the bacteria does not have the chance to grow. There's even a bigger danger zone, that's between 70 degrees and 125, that they pathogens really grow rapidly in this ballpark. So time temperature control, initial one's 41 degrees to 135. The high danger zone is 70 to 125. Certainly food has been time temperature abused whenever it's handling in the following ways, right? We don't even give it a chance. So we cook it to the wrong internal temperature. It's held or it's at rest for at the wrong temperature. It's out, but it's not at the right temperature there. It's cooked or reheated incorrectly. So again, a few things that can be classified as time temperature abuse here. Questions, comments here? Okay. Avoid it, right? So a lot of times we need to monitor the time and the temperature. So if you have any type of charts or lists that we can use, want to make sure we're using the right kinds of thermometers. As you guys know, there's many different types, which we'll go over shortly. Regularly record those temperature and times they are taken, especially if you're going to be in a situation where somebody checks up on you, and then minimize that time that food is spent in that temperature danger zone. And take those corrective actions if time temperature standards are not met, so that we can get the food either higher or lower depending on what type of food it is. Talked a little bit about monitoring the time and temperature at the thermometer, right? Bimetallic stem thermometer. Obviously, you have the dial to where it tells you the temp, and really anything below the dimple here in the middle is the sensing area, so you can get a pretty good idea on the temperature, internal temperature of your food. Some different types of thermometers, right? We want to make sure that we measure temperature through a metal probe, especially the internal temperature. A lot of the thermometers today display temperatures digitally. As I showed you in the last picture, it's not the whole shaft of the thermometer, but it's really the sensing area on the tip of the probe. And let's get into the different types of thermometers. There can be an immersion probe. There can be a surface probe. We just want to know the temperature of the surface temperature of the food we're serving. Penetration probe, and then of course an air probe as well. There's also these infrared laser thermometers. It's used to measure the surface temperature of food and equipment. The nice thing about it is you just need to hold them as close to the food or equipment as possible. It can take a pretty good temperature without having to disturb the food itself. Remove anything between the thermometer and the food package or equipment. Make sure you don't get a false reading. So you just want to hold them as close to the food as you can, but certainly remove a cover and that type of thing. And then follow any manufacturer's guidelines on the thermometer itself. For those foods that we don't have an ongoing thermometer of that because maybe nobody's monitoring it, a maximum registering thermometer will indicate the highest temperature reached during use. So again, it's certainly used where temperature readings cannot be continually observed. It will certainly let you know if it's reached a certain temperature, and that's probably not a good thing. And then so there's some indicators that monitor both time and temperature. A lot of them are attached to packages by the supplier to make sure that they deliver the product, at the temperature and the time that they say they're going to deliver the product to ensure quality. And then on that particular monitor, a color change could appear on the device when some type of abuse of the package has occurred. So again, that could be on the packages that you're receiving. When using the thermometers, right, we want to wash, rinse, sanitize, and air dry all the thermometers before and after each use. So again, so that we're not getting false readings because they're dirty or that we're cross-contaminating and those types of things. Try to get as close as possible, right? Make sure the thermometers used to measure the temperature are accurate. So you may have to calibrate those if they have a calibrating option on those thermometers. If we're using glass, we want to make sure that that glass thermometer is encased in a shatterproof covering. Last thing you need is to have a well-prepared meal, have a glass thermometer explode in that food. Thoughts, questions, comments here. The flow of food, purchasing, receiving, and storage. So once again, purchase food from approved, reputable suppliers. Adam asked, are you going to talk about proper cooling procedures? That is almost always on the test. Yes, it'll be on here. It might not be today. Could be a little bit of review before we get into the exam next week, but we will talk about cooling as well. So we want to make sure that when we purchase the food's been inspected right, meets all the local, state, and federal laws. Get to know your own vendor or your food supplier's safety practices so that we don't have a lot of concerns, right? Maybe you consider reviewing recent inspection reports from your vendors or suppliers and look at their reports that they received from the USDA, FDA, and any third-party inspectors. When we get that delivery, crucially important, right? Visually inspect the delivery vehicle, right? We want to make sure, just take a good look at the delivery vehicle to make sure there's no signs of contamination in the vehicle, the condition, look for signs of any pests that might have had an outbreak in delivery, those types of things. And then visually inspect any food items, especially checking the temperatures for those foods that qualify in that area. And then making sure after we check those in that we store items as quickly as possible. Questions, comments, thoughts here? If there's any recalls from your vendor, right, identify the recalled food items. Got to take those right out of inventory because of safety issues that they could cause a foodborne illness and that kind of stuff. Same type of thing when we had that foodborne outbreak. We want to take the food out of our inventory and place it in a secure and appropriate location, and we want to make sure that we label it. Store it separately, but label it as well, right? Label the item so that those that are coming in for any investigation can understand what types of things that were going on in that particular item. And then inform the staff not to use the product as well, and then refer to the vendor's notification or recall notice to determine what to do with these items, because they may want them back, right? To finish up their investigation type of thing. When it gets into shellfish and molluscan shellfish documentation, they're very particular about that, right? We want to make sure that we're storing shellfish in that original container. We don't want to remove the tag or label until the last of the shellfish is used so that we can do any type of investigation if there's been an outbreak of any type. When that last shellfish is removed, write the date on the tag, label or invoice, the date that you last used it, and then keep it on file in chronological order for 90 days from that date. Okay? Storing it, keep in the same container they are received in until sold or prepared, like it says up at the top. And we don't want to mix the shellfish from one container that we received to another unless they have the same certification number or harvest date, or they're from the same growing area. I would just suggest not to mix them at all, just to be on the safe side. Many of the kitchens that I know don't slow down enough to make sure that they have the same certification number or harvest date on there. So again, now you have to follow the policies and procedures of your own organization to make sure that you're following the rules that they have provided. Questions, comments here? Fish are under some of the same type of scrutiny, right? Fish to be eaten raw or partially cooked. Must indicate fish was correctly frozen. Keep document 90 days from sale of the fish. And then if we have farm raised fish, we want to know the document must state fish raised to FDA standards, which, is pretty straightforward. And again, once again, keep that document for 90 days from the sale of the fish so that we have the documentation of what's going on there. Thoughts, questions, comments on either shellfish or regular fish? Labels on food packaged on site for retail must include, right? So maybe this is stuff you sell retail wise on the shelf or in a vending machine. Common name of the food or a statement clearly identifying it. Quantity of the food. If the item contains 2 or more ingredients, now we need to go ahead and list the ingredients and sub-ingredients in the sending order by weight. List any artificial colors or flavors in the food, including chemical preservatives. So you say you want to prepare your food on site and sell it. That's a lot of stuff. And then the name and place of business of the manufacturer, packer, and distributor, and then source of each major food allergen contained in the food. So a lot of things that go into package on site for retail sale. But again, you guys might have a different process, making sure that you follow those before this overall list. If we're talking about ready to eat food, must be date marked if held longer than 24 hours, right? So you see the label over there. Want to understand when we've held that food, what's been going on, and then what it is, so that we know and can handle it appropriately. So the label must indicate when the food must be sold, eaten, or thrown out. And so we need to pay attention to that. And if it's gone past that time or date or both, we need to make sure that we throw that out to, make sure that we're doing the right things for the client, for the customer. Can store only 7 days if it's held at 41 degrees or lower, 7 days, and then it's out. So again, labels are extremely important. So after that date, the food must be discarded. No ifs, ands, or buts there, okay? Getting the dates on there. Thoughts, questions here? So storage, right? And a lot of this is going to do next week when we go over the temperature that something must be heated to. This is probably the reverse order, the reverse order of that from top to bottom, because again, we want to prevent any cross-contamination here, right? So we want to store food items in the following order, top to bottom. Any ready-to-eat food on the very top. Seafood, the next would be on shelf B. Any whole cuts of beef or pork on C. Then we get into the ground meat and ground fish on D. And then whole and ground poultry as far as E. Adam, talk about what you mean by swim, walk, and fly to help remember it.
So we just, it's kind of easier, I think, for our staff than trying to remember seafood, things like that. So swim would be on the top, seafood, everything swims, right? Stuff that walks on the ground. So that'd be your beef and pork, with ground underneath the whole cuts. And then anything that would be fly. So poultry, eggs, and ground poultry, and anything like that on the very bottom. So it's kind of just I don't know, it's easier, I think, for a lot of our staff to remember it that way.
Perfect. Love it, Adam. Thanks for adding that piece. Got it. So that way, this will be on the exam too. They'll want you to make sure that you put these in the correct order for storage. So use the swim, walk, fly analogy there to help you remember that going forward. And again, it is based on the minimum internal temperature of each food. It's just in reverse order of that. And we know that any supplies outside of the food should be stored away from the walls and at least 6 inches off the floor, right? We don't want to put any types of foods right next to the wall and or on the floor. Just too much availability for things to happen. Any food that becomes unsafe. Yeah. Discard any food that becomes unsafe, right? If it's food is missing a date mark, then we won't even know, right? We don't even know if it's good. Probably is, but we don't want to run the risk, right? Food exceeding the date mark for some reason. If you have that in your operation, obviously it's some waste, and it's unfortunate, but we need to get rid of the food so that it doesn't cause any issues. Time temperature requirements, either on the low side or the high side. Want to make sure that it hasn't spent a lot of time in that danger zone. If this food will be returned, right, we want to store it away. If the vendors ask for it back, or we are going to return it to the vendor because it's come in spoiled or damaged or whatever the case is, and we want to label that food so the food handlers do not use the product going forward. Any questions or comments on any of that? Okay, that's where I'm going to stop today. I'm going to take attendance, and then we're going to take anybody else that wants to present their class project. So 1 second. I'll stop sharing. I think I did that, and then I'll stop recording here. Maybe.